There is a mathematician who made more than $28 billion trading in financial markets without ever looking at a single piece of economic news, without ever reading a Wall Street analyst report, and without ever, at any point in his career spanning more than 3 decades, making an investment decision based on intuition. James Simons built the most profitable fund in the history of modern capitalism using exclusively mathematical patterns that the human brain cannot see with the naked eye. And here's the part that should bother you deeply. The same mistakes that prevent you from building significant wealth are mistakes that Simons identified, cataloged, and systematically exploited to extract billions of dollars from the market. You are not losing money to the market. You are losing money to people like him. And today, I'm going to show you exactly what those mistakes are, why you keep making them even when you think you're not, and what cold, impersonal math reveals about the real reason most people remain financially stagnant their entire lives, while a small fraction of the population accumulates wealth in ways that seem almost supernatural. Before I continue, I need to ask a direct question. Are you watching this video because you want confirmation that you're doing things right? Or are you watching it because you genuinely want to find out where you're going wrong? Because if you just want validation, this isn't the content for you. What I will present in the next few dozen minutes is based on research from the National Bureau of Economic Research, data from the Federal Reserve, longitudinal studies from Vanguard, and behavioral analyses documented by Nobel laureate Richard Thaler. They are not opinions, they are diagnoses, and diagnoses are sometimes uncomfortable. If you are the type of person who prefers mathematical truth over emotional comfort, subscribe to this channel now and activate the bell. You'll want to be here in the coming weeks because what I share is backed by institutions like the Federal Reserve, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Journal of Finance. Now let's get down to business. The first mistake that keeps people poor is so fundamental and so universally committed that most people don't even recognize they are making it. It is the mistake of confusing income with wealth. It seems obvious when said like that, but the data shows that this confusion is epidemic. According to Federal Reserve research published in 2022, approximately 64% of American families earning more than $100,000 a year live paycheck to paycheck. Let me repeat that number because it is important. 64%. 2 out of 3 families that society considers to be upper middle class cannot go 3 months without income before facing serious financial difficulties. This is not income poverty. It is poverty of behavior. And James Simons understood this very early in his career. Before founding Renaissance Technologies, Simons was a mathematics professor at MIT and then Stony Brook. His salary was modest compared to what he would earn later, but he already applied a principle that most people ignore. The savings rate matters more than the rate of return in the first years of accumulation. Let me demonstrate this mathematically because numbers don't lie and they have no agenda. Imagine 2 people. The first earns $80,000 a year and saves 20%. That is $16,000 a year. The second earns $150,000 a year but saves only 5%. That is $7,500 a year. Both invest in the same index, say the S&P 500, with a historical average return of approximately 10% per year. After 20 years, the first person, who earns almost half the salary, will have accumulated approximately $916,000. The second person, with almost double the income, will have accumulated approximately $430,000. The person who earns less ends up with more than twice as much wealth. This isn't magic. It's compound interest math applied to savings behavior. And it's exactly the kind of insight that most people refuse to accept because it contradicts the comfortable narrative that wealth is a function of how much you earn. James Simons' Medallion Fund is famous for its extraordinary returns of approximately 66% per year gross before fees. But what few know is that Simons himself, in rare interviews, has always emphasized that investor behavior is more determining than investment strategy for most people. In a talk at MIT in 2010, Simons said something that should be engraved in bronze and placed at the entrance of every stockbroker's office. Most investors, our eye would be better served if I just stopped trying to be smart. This sentence sounds simple, but it contains decades of mathematical observation about how human behavior destroys returns. The second mistake that keeps people poor is the inability to tolerate financial boredom. This may seem abstract, so let me make it concrete. The S&P 500, from 1950 to today, has had an average annualized return of approximately 10%. But to capture that return, an investor would need to have remained invested through 50% declines in 2008, 34% declines in March 2020, and dozens of smaller corrections over more than 7 decades. Most people can't do this, not because they are stupid, not because they don't understand math, but because the human brain evolved to avoid losses much more intensely than to seek gains. Daniel Kahneman, Nobel laureate in economics in 2002, documented this phenomenon extensively. The pain of losing $100 is psychologically approximately twice as intense as the pleasure of gaining $100. This is called loss aversion, and it is one of the most costly cognitive biases that exist in the context of investing. James Simons built the Medallion Fund specifically to remove human decisions from the investment process. The fund's algorithms execute thousands of operations per day based on statistical patterns, without any emotional intervention. When the market falls, the algorithms continue to operate as programmed. When the market goes up, the same thing. There is no fear. There is no greed. There is no urge to check your portfolio every hour to see if the number has gone up or down. And here's the crucial insight. Simons didn't build this system because he thought humans were inferior to machines in general intelligence. He built it because he understood that humans are systematically inferior to machines in behavioral consistency. The advantage of the algorithm is not that it is smarter. It's just that he doesn't feel bored, he doesn't feel afraid, and he doesn't have the compulsion to do something when the ideal strategy is to do nothing. Research from Dalbar Inc., a company that has analyzed investor behavior for more than 30 years, shows that the average American investor has returned approximately 3.6% per year over the last 3 decades, while the S&P 500 returned approximately 10% per year over the same period. This difference of 6.4 percentage points per year is called the behavior gap, the cost of behavior. To put it in perspective, if you invested $100,000 30 years ago and got the return of the average investor, you have approximately $290,000 today. If you had simply bought an index fund and done absolutely nothing for 3 decades, you would have approximately $1,700,000. The difference of $1,400,000 was not lost to fees. It was not lost to inflation. It was not lost to the market. She was lost to her own behavior. I'm going to do a social experiment now. I want to test a hypothesis about the geographic distribution of people who can process financial information rationally without emotional reactivity. Put in the comments below the city where you are watching. It could be Miami, Houston, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Phoenix, Denver, Seattle, or if you are in Latin America, cities like Mexico City, Bogota, Buenos Aires, São Paulo, Santiago. I genuinely want to map where the audience that is interested in financial analysis based on data and not empty promises comes from. The third mistake that keeps people poor is the obsession with return and complete neglect of risk. This is particularly devastating because it seems intuitively right to seek the highest return possible. But the long-term math tells a completely different story. There is a concept in quantitative finance called risk-adjusted return, often measured by the Sharpe ratio. This index, developed by Nobel laureate William Sharpe, compares the return on an investment above the risk-free rate with the volatility of that return. And here's what most investors don't understand. An investment with an average return of 15% per year and volatility of 30% often produces less accumulated wealth over the long term than an investment with an average return of 8% per year and volatility of 10%. It sounds counterintuitive, But the mathematical explanation is elegant and relentless. When you lose 50% of your portfolio, you need to gain 100% to get back to where you started. Not 50%, 100%. If you had $100,000 and lost 50 PI or 100, now there are 50,000. To get back to 100,000, you need to double your money. This mathematical asymmetry means that high volatility destroys wealth even when average returns are high. James Simons understood this deeply. The Medallion Fund does not seek the highest possible returns. It seeks the highest possible consistent returns with the lowest drawdown, the smallest drop from peak to trough possible. According to analysis by former Renaissance Technologies employees who have published academic research, Medallion's largest drawdown in any 12-month period was approximately 20%. Compared to the S&P 500, which had drawdowns of over 50% in 2008, this is extraordinarily low for a fund that generates such high returns. The practical implication for the individual investor is clear. If you are choosing investments solely for potential return without considering volatility and significant drawdown risk, you are playing a mathematically losing game in the long run. Research from the Journal of Finance, published in 2018, analyzed more than 3,000 mutual funds over 20 years and found that funds with the highest returns in any 3-year period were significantly more likely to have the worst returns in the following 3 years. Why? Because extremely high returns often come from concentration of risk, and concentration of risk eventually turns against the investor. The fourth mistake that keeps people poor is the illusion that market timing works. I'll be blunt, it doesn't work. Not for you, not for me, not for the vast majority of professional managers who dedicate their entire lives to trying to make it work. According to a Standard & Poor's study called SPIVA, which compares the performance of active managers against their passive benchmarks, more than 85% of active fund managers in the United States have failed to outperform the S&P 500 in any period of 15 years or more. These are professionals with access to privileged legal information, teams of analysts, cutting-edge technology, and decades of experience. And yet, the vast majority fail to beat a simple passive index. James Simons is one of the rare documented exceptions. But here's what makes Simons the exception rather than the rule. He doesn't try to predict the market. The Medallion Fund does not operate based on predictions about what the market will do. It operates based on very short-term statistical patterns that appear and disappear in fractions of a second. The average holding period of Medallion positions is measured in hours, sometimes minutes. This is fundamentally different from what the individual investor does when trying to time the market. You are not competing in the same game. You're bringing a knife to a drone war. Let me demonstrate the mathematical cost of trying to time the market. Research from J.P. Morgan Asset Management analyzed the S&P 500 between 1999 and 2019, a period of 20 years. An investor who remained fully invested throughout the entire period turned $10,000 into approximately $32,000. An investor who missed only the 10 best trading days in that period, 10 days out of more than 5,000 trading days, ended up with approximately $16,000, less than half. What if you missed the 20 best days? Approximately $10,400. It basically remained at zero after 2 decades. And the 30 best days? Approximately $7,000. It lost money in nominal terms after 20 years on the market. The problem is that the best market days often occur right after the worst days. The biggest daily gains in the history of the S&P 500 have happened during the biggest crises, because panicked markets eventually correct violently upward. If you sold during the panic, you missed the recovery. And losing recovery is mathematically devastating in ways that human intuition cannot correctly process. The fifth mistake that keeps people poor is the inability to distinguish between risk and uncertainty. This distinction was articulated by economist Frank Knight in 1921 and is fundamental to understanding how money really works. Risk is when you know the probabilities. If you flip a coin, the probability of heads is 50%. This is quantifiable risk. Uncertainty is when you do not and cannot know the probabilities. When you ask what the market return will be over the next 10 years, you are dealing with uncertainty, not risk. There is no mathematical model that can give you this answer with significant statistical confidence. James Simons built his fortune by operating exclusively in the realm of quantifiable risk. The algorithms, medallions identify statistical patterns where probabilities can be estimated with sufficient precision to generate an advantage. When probabilities cannot be estimated, the fund does not operate. This discipline of only playing games where you know the odds is exactly the opposite of what most individual investors do. Most people invest based on narratives, on feelings about the future, on analysts' predictions that have a worse track record than flipping coins. Philip Tetlock, a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, has spent 20 years cataloging predictions from experts in a variety of fields. His conclusion, published in the book Expert Political Judgment, is devastating. Famous experts who appear on television making predictions have a hit rate that is statistically indistinguishable from chimpanzees throwing darts at a dartboard. The sixth error that keeps people poor is the fallacy of knowledge. The more people learn about the financial market, the more confident they become in their predictions. But the accuracy of those predictions does not increase proportionately. Research by Paul Slovic, a behavioral psychologist, has shown that giving decision-makers more information significantly increases confidence, but does not significantly increase accuracy. You feel more right, but you are no longer right. This is particularly dangerous in finance because excessive confidence leads to excessive portfolio concentration and excessive trading, both proven return destroyers. Simons approached this problem elegantly. He hired mathematicians, physicists, and computer scientists who knew nothing about finance. Literally nothing. Renaissance technologies actively avoided hiring people with Wall Street experience because Simons believed conventional knowledge about markets was more harmful than helpful. He wanted people to look at price data as pure data, without the narratives and theories that finance professionals carry with them. This unorthodox approach has produced results that no traditional fund has been able to replicate. The seventh mistake that keeps people poor is neglecting the opportunity cost of time. Every day you put off starting to invest has a calculable cost. It's not metaphor, it's compound interest math. Let me demonstrate with specific numbers why this point is crucial and often underestimated. Person A starts investing $500 a month at age 25 and stops at age 35. 10 years of contributions totaling $60,000 invested. After that, you don't contribute anything anymore. You just let the money grow until you're 65. Assuming an average return of 8% per year, this person will have approximately $787,000 at age 65. Person B begins investing the same $500 per month at age 35 and continues until age 65. 30 years of contributions totaling $180,000 invested. 3 times more money put into the system. With the same 8% return per year, this person will have approximately $745,000 at age 65. You read that right. The person who invested 3 times less total money ended up with more equity because they started 10 years earlier. That's the power of time in compound interest, and it's mathematically impossible to recover once time has passed. Each year of delay has a permanent cost that no rate of return can fully offset. The 8th mistake that keeps people poor is the confusion between volatility and permanent risk. When the market drops 20%, most people feel like they have lost 20% of their money. But if you didn't sell, you didn't lose anything. The loss only materializes when you turn a temporary price fluctuation into a permanent decision to sell. This confusion between price fluctuation and value destruction is one of the most expensive in personal finance. Data from the Federal Reserve Economic Data shows that the S&P has had declines of at least 20% on 13 occasions since 1950. On each of these 13 occasions, the market eventually recovered and reached new all-time highs. No exception. Investors who sold during these declines crystallized losses that did not need to exist. Investors who remained invested saw their portfolios recover and continue to grow. James Simons approached volatility in a radically different way. Instead of fearing it, he explored it. Volatility creates short-term inefficiencies that algorithms can identify and monetize. When other investors are panic selling, Medallion's algorithms are often buying. When others are in euphoric buying, the algorithms are often selling. Volatility is the natural environment where quantitative strategies thrive, but it is the environment where emotional investors are systematically destroyed. The ninth mistake that keeps people poor is the search for complexity when simplicity is superior. There is a widespread belief that sophisticated investment strategies produce better results than simple strategies. The data shows exactly the opposite. A Morningstar study analyzing more than 20 years of mutual fund data found that the variable with the greatest predictive power of future performance was simply the fund's management fee. The lower the rate, the greater the probability of superior performance. Not the manager's strategy, not the past history, not the sophistication of the analysis. The fee. Jack Bogle, founder of Vanguard and creator of the first index fund for individual investors, has spent his entire career arguing that simplicity beats complexity in investing. Data accumulated over 5 decades confirmed his thesis unequivocally. Vanguard's S&P 500 index fund, with a management fee of 0.03%, has outperformed more than 80% of active funds over any period of 15 years or more. No star manager, no proprietary analysis, no market timing, just diversified market exposure with minimal cost. Paradoxically, James Simons, who operates one of the most complex funds in the world, would agree with Bogle about what is appropriate for individual investors. In interviews, Simons has consistently said that normal people shouldn't try to replicate what Renaissance does. The advantages of Medallion, billion-dollar technology infrastructure, PhDs in math and physics, working exclusively on algorithms, proprietary data that costs fortunes to acquire, are not available to the individual investor. For you, the ideal strategy is probably the simplest. Low-cost index funds, regular contributions, a long-term horizon, and the discipline of doing nothing when the market gets turbulent. The 10th mistake that keeps people poor is the fundamental misunderstanding of how inflation silently destroys wealth. Most people understand that inflation exists, but fail to emotionally process the impact accumulated over decades. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics show that average inflation in the United States since 1971 is approximately 3.9% per year. This means that the purchasing power of a dollar drops by half approximately every 18 years. If you're stashing money in a checking account or a mattress, you're losing wealth in real terms every day. $100,000 today will be equivalent to approximately $50,000 in purchasing power 2 decades from now if kept in cash. This is not a loss of money in the nominal sense. The number on the account remains the same, but it is a real destruction of future consumption capacity. James Simons built the Medallion Fund with an explicit goal of consistently generating returns significantly above inflation. The average return of 66% per year before fees represents approximately 62 percentage points above historical inflation. Even after the hefty performance fees that Renaissance charges, 44% of profits, Medallion investors see massively positive returns in real terms. Compared to this, the investor who keeps money in cash out of fear of the market is guaranteeing slow-motion wealth destruction. The 11th mistake that keeps people poor is the inability to think in terms of systems rather than events. Most investors think in terms of individual decisions. Should I buy this stock? Should I sell now? Will the market go up or down? This single-event mindset is mathematically inferior to the continuous system mindset. An investment system is a set of rules that you follow regardless of how you feel at any particular time. For example, automatically invest $500 per month on the first of each month. Rebalance the portfolio once a year to maintain target allocation. Never sell during market declines of less than 40%. These are system rules. They remove the need to make decisions in the heat of the moment, when cognitive biases are most active. The Medallion Fund is the extreme example of systems thinking. The algorithms are the system. Humans don't make individual trading decisions. They build and refine the system that makes the decisions. This separation between system construction and decision execution is fundamental. When you are in the middle of a market panic, your predefined system continues to operate as designed, while your emotions, they scream to do something different. The discipline of following the system, even when it is psychologically uncomfortable, is what separates investors who build wealth from investors who destroy wealth. The 12th mistake that keeps people poor is the systematic underestimation of how much money they really need for retirement. Research from the Employee Benefit Research Institute shows that approximately 43% of American workers estimate they need less than $500,000 to retire comfortably. When you do the actual math, this number is dramatically insufficient for most people. Let's calculate together. If you retire with $500,000 and follow the 4% rule, a widely used guideline that suggests taking 4% out of your portfolio in the first year and adjusting for inflation later, you can withdraw $20,000 in the first year. That's $1,666 a month. In cities like Miami, Los Angeles, New York, or Chicago, this amount barely covers rent. You would be relying heavily on Social Security for any quality of life, and Social Security is designed to only replace about 40% of pre-retirement income for middle-income workers. For a truly comfortable retirement that allows you to maintain your standard of living without financial anxiety, most financial planners suggest having at least 25 times your desired annual expenses. If you want to spend $80,000 a year in retirement, you need $2 million. If you want $100,000 a year, you need $2,500,000. These numbers scare a lot of people, but scaring them now is better than them turning 65 and discovering that the math doesn't add up. The 13th error that keeps people poor is the consumption pattern that grows proportionally with income. Economists call this lifestyle inflation or hedonic financial adaptation. When you get a pay raise, your expenses tend to increase proportionately. Better car, bigger apartment, more expensive restaurants, more frequent trips. The result is that your savings rate remains stagnant even with rising income. Data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis shows that the average personal savings rate in the United States has hovered between 3 and 8% for decades. This means that for every $100 of income, between $92 and $97 are spent on immediate consumption. Compared to countries like China, where the savings rate exceeds 35%, or Singapore, where it exceeds 50%, American consumer culture is a structural obstacle to building individual wealth. James Simons, despite being one of the richest men in the world, was known for a relatively modest lifestyle compared to other billionaires. He didn't collect giant yachts or private islands. His personal expenses were a microscopic fraction of his net worth. This discipline of keeping consumption disconnected from consumption capacity is a common characteristic among people who build and maintain significant wealth over generations. The ability to say no to lifestyle upgrades, even when you can easily afford them, is a financial skill that few develop. The 14th error that keeps people poor is the confusion between speculation and investment. Speculation is buying something, hoping the price will rise, so you can sell it to someone else at a higher price. Investment is buying a stake in productive assets that generate cash flow regardless of price fluctuations. This distinction may seem semantic, but it has profound practical implications. When you buy shares of a profitable company with a history of growing dividends, you are investing. Even if the share price falls by 50% tomorrow, the company continues to operate, continues to generate profits, continues to pay dividends. Your long-term return fundamentally comes from the productivity of the underlying business. When you buy an asset purely because you believe it will rise in price, be it cryptocurrency, meme stock, or anything whose value depends solely on finding someone willing to pay more later, you are speculating. There is nothing inherently wrong with speculation as long as you understand that that is what you are doing, and only allocate money that you can completely afford to lose. The problem is when people confuse speculation with investment and allocate significant capital to speculative assets thinking they are building long-term wealth. Data from the FINRA Foundation shows that more than 60% of investors who purchased meme stocks in 2021 said they were investing for retirement. This is dangerous categorical confusion. The 15th mistake that keeps people poor is the lack of adequate diversification. Modern portfolio theory, developed by Harry Markowitz, and which earned him the Nobel Prize in economics, mathematically demonstrates that diversification reduces risk without necessarily reducing expected return. It's the only free lunch in finance, in Markowitz's own words. But most individual investors have dramatically under-diversified portfolios. Vanguard research shows that the average American investor has approximately 70% of their portfolio in U.S. domestic stocks, completely neglecting international markets that represent more than 40% of global capitalization. Furthermore, within the allocation to U.S. stocks, there is often excessive concentration in a few popular technology companies. James Simon's Medallion Fund is extremely diversified in terms of number of positions, often thousands of simultaneous positions, although it is concentrated in terms of short-term quantitative strategy. This diversification of positions reduces the impact of any individual error in the thousands of bets the fund makes daily. For the individual investor, the functional equivalent is investing in broad index funds that hold thousands of companies, achieving automatic diversification without the need to select individual positions. The 16th mistake that keeps people poor is neglecting tax-advantaged accounts. The American tax system offers significant incentives to those who use appropriate investment vehicles. The 401k allows pre-tax contributions of up to $23,500 in 2025, plus an additional $7,500 for those over 50. The traditional IRA offers tax deductions for contributions of up to $7,000 per year. The Roth IRA offers completely tax-free growth forever, as long as withdrawals are made after age 59 and a half. Ignoring these tax advantages is leaving money on the table. If you are in the 24% tax bracket and contribute the maximum to your 401k, you are saving approximately $5,600 in federal taxes for that year alone. Over a 30-year career, that represents tens of thousands of dollars in tax savings, money that could be growing in compound interest instead of going to the government. Simons structured Renaissance technologies in tax-efficient ways that allowed medallion investors to keep more of their extraordinary returns. While the specific strategies available to billion-dollar hedge funds are not accessible to individual investors, the principle of using the tax legal structure to your advantage applies universally. The 17th mistake that keeps people poor is the belief that it is too late to start. This belief is particularly pernicious because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe it's too late, you don't start. If it doesn't start, it really is too late when you finally realize that you should have started. The mathematical truth is that it's never too late to improve your financial situation, but every day of delay has a cost. If you are 50 years old and have zero savings, starting to invest $1,000 a month now means you will have approximately $350,000 by the age of 65, assuming an 8% return. It's not the same as if you started at 25, but it's dramatically better than getting to 65 with nothing. James Simons didn't found Renaissance technologies until he was in his 50s. Before that, he was an academic. Medallion's extraordinary returns were generated during Simons's 60s, 70s, and 80s. The notion that there is a right age to start building wealth is a fallacy that only serves to justify inaction. The 18th mistake that keeps people poor is excessive dependence on active income. Active income is money you earn in direct exchange for your time, salary, hourly pay, professional fees. Passive income is money that your assets generate without your ongoing direct participation. Dividends, interest, rents, royalties. Most people depend almost exclusively on active income throughout their working lives. The problem with this is that you can only exchange a finite amount of hours for money. There is a physical ceiling on how much you can earn by selling your time. There is no equivalent ceiling on how much your assets can generate while you sleep. The Medallion Fund is the extreme example of passive income, money generating money automatically through algorithms that operate 24 hours a day on global markets. For the individual investor, the affordable version of this is build an investment portfolio that generates dividends and capital growth without requiring constant attention. A $1 million portfolio invested in index funds that historically return 10% a year generates $100,000 a year on average, the equivalent of an upper-middle-class salary without trading any hours of work. The 19th mistake that keeps people poor is making financial decisions based on temporary emotions. When you're scared, you sell. When you're excited, you buy. When you are bored, you make unnecessary changes to your portfolio. Each of these emotional actions has a measurable financial cost. Richard Thaler, Nobel laureate in economics and one of the fathers of behavioral economics, documented dozens of cognitive biases that systematically lead investors to make suboptimal decisions. Disposition effect, the tendency to sell winners too soon and hold losers too long. Confirmation bias, the tendency to seek information that confirms existing beliefs and ignore information that contradicts them. Anchoring, the tendency to give excessive weight to arbitrary numbers such as purchase price. These biases are not character flaws. They are structural limitations of human cognitive hardware that evolved for completely different environments than the modern financial market. SIMONS solved this problem by removing humans from trading decisions. Medallion's algorithms do not suffer from cognitive biases. They are not afraid of corrections. They don't feel greed in highs. They execute the programmed strategy regardless of what is happening in the external world. For the individual investor who cannot build sophisticated algorithms, the practical solution is to create systematic rules and follow them rigidly, using automation whenever possible to remove the emotional decision moment. The 20th mistake that keeps people poor, and this may be the most important of all, is the lack of ongoing financial education. Most people receive zero formal education about how money works. You don't learn in high school. You don't learn in college unless you study finance or economics. They learn, if they learn, through trial and error, or through advice from family and friends, who are often as uninformed as they are. If you've made it this far in this video, you're already doing more for your financial education than most people do in an entire year. And this simple act of seeking a systematic understanding of how money works has measurable economic value. A study by the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center at George Washington University found a significant correlation between the level of financial education and indicators of financial well-being such as savings rate, portfolio diversification, and preparation for retirement. SIMONS was obsessed with continuous learning. Even after becoming a billionaire, he continued to seek new mathematical models, new data, new ways of understanding markets. This intellectual humility, the recognition that there is always more to learn, is a common trait among people who build and maintain wealth over decades. The opposite of this, the arrogant certainty that you already know everything you need to know, is almost a guarantee of financial stagnation. If you've recognized at least 3 of these errors in your own behavior, don't feel ashamed. Feel gratitude for the opportunity to correct. The difference between people who build wealth and people who remain stagnant isn't intelligence, it's not luck, it's not connections. It is the willingness to honestly examine one's behavior, identify dysfunctional patterns, and implement systematic corrections. If this analysis framework made sense to you, hit the like button now. Only about 3% of YouTube viewers actually like videos. Be part of that 3% that takes action instead of just passively consuming. And if you know someone who is making these mistakes, someone you care about, and would like to see prosper financially, share this video with them. It may be the most important analysis she watches this year, but identifying errors is only half the equation. The other half is implementing fixes that work in the real world, not just in theory. So let me give you a practical framework that anyone can implement starting today, regardless of income level or prior knowledge. Step 1. Automate your savings. Set up automatic transfer of at least 15% of your income to an investment account on the day you receive your paycheck. Don't rely on your discipline to do this manually every month. Humans are terrible at long-term discipline. Systems are good at discipline. Use the system. Step 2. Simplify your investment strategy. For the vast majority of people, the ideal allocation. It's surprisingly simple. A low-cost global equity index fund as a percentage equal to 100 minus your age, and the rest in fixed income securities. At 30, 70% in stocks, 30% in fixed income. At age 60, 40% in stocks, 60% in fixed income. Rebalance once a year. End. Step 3. Maximize tax-advantaged accounts. If your employer offers 401k matching, contribute at least up to the match limit. That's literally free money. Once you've maximized the match, consider IRA or Roth IRA depending on your specific tax situation. Only after maximizing these tax-advantaged accounts should you be investing in regular taxable accounts. Step 4. Ignore the noise. Don't watch financial news programs daily. Don't check your portfolio value more than once a month. Don't make changes to your strategy based on newspaper headlines or social media posts. The amount of attention you pay to your portfolio should be inversely proportional to how much you want it to grow. The less you move, the better the result tends to be. Step 5. Increase your savings rate with each increase in income. When you receive a pay raise, commit to directing at least 50% of that additional increase toward savings before adjusting your lifestyle. If you earn $5,000 a month and get a raise to $5,500, commit to saving at least an additional $250 each month before spending anything extra. Step 6. Establish an emergency fund before investing aggressively. 3 to 6 months of expenses in a highly liquid account, a high-yield savings account, or money market fund should exist before you can begin maximizing long-term investments. Without this cushion, any emergency forces you to sell investments at potentially unfavorable times. Step 7. Continually educate yourself, but filter rigorously. Most financial content on the internet is rubbish, either due to incompetence or conflict of interest. Prioritize sources based on empirical research, Vanguard research, Morningstar, peer-reviewed academic publications. Be wary of any source that promises specific results or that makes money by selling you financial products. Step 8. Review your situation annually, but not more often. Once a year, sit down for a few hours to review your progress toward your goals, rebalance your portfolio if necessary, and adjust contributions based on changes in income or circumstances. Outside of this annual review, let the system run without interference. These 8 steps, implemented consistently over decades, will produce better results than 90% of individual investors trying more complex strategies. Not because the steps are brilliant or secret, they are widely known and well documented in the financial literature, but because most people can't do simple things consistently or long enough to see results. James Simons built a money-making machine incomparably more sophisticated than anything an individual investor could replicate. But the underlying principles, systematics rather than intuition, discipline rather than emotion, humility rather than arrogance, are universal and applicable to anyone willing to adopt them. You started this video perhaps wondering why you remain poor, despite working hard and having good intentions. Now you know. It is not because you are deficient in character or ability. It's because you are operating with the wrong assumptions about how wealth is actually built. And wrong assumptions, made consistently for decades, produce systematically bad results regardless of effort. The good news is that assumptions can be corrected, behaviors can be modified, systems can be implemented, and the math of compound interest is democratic. It works equally well for anyone who uses it correctly. You don't have to be James Simons to build significant wealth. You just need to stop making the mistakes most people make and start applying principles that mathematics and empirical research validate over and over again. The question now is not whether you understand. I assume you understand, given that you've gotten this far. The question is whether you will act. The distance between knowledge and result is always action, and most people who watch videos like this never take action. They nod, feel momentarily motivated, and then return to exactly the same behavioral patterns that kept them stagnant for decades. Don't be that person. Be the person who uses information as fuel for real change. You have approximately 78 years of life expectancy if you live in the United States. If you're watching this in your 30s, you have approximately 48 years of adult life ahead of you. More than enough time to build significant generational wealth if you start now and maintain discipline. If you are 40, you are approximately 38 years old, still plenty of time. If you are 50, you have approximately 28 years, completely enough to transform your financial situation in a material way. The only scenario where it really is too late is the scenario where you decide it's too late and do nothing. This analysis is for educational purposes only, based on historical data and mathematical principles documented by institutions such as the Federal Reserve, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the National Bureau of Economic Research, and peer-reviewed academic research published in the Journal of Finance and other publications of recognized credibility. Nothing presented here constitutes financial advice or investment recommendations specific to your individual situation. Past performance does not guarantee future results. This is not just a legal disclaimer. It is a fundamental mathematical fact about the probabilistic nature of markets. Markets involve inherent risk and uncertainty that cannot be eliminated, only managed. Always consult qualified financial professionals, certified financial planners, registered investment advisors, before making investment decisions that affect your real wealth. The goal of everything I share is to equip you with mathematical frameworks to think about money more clearly and systematically, not to prescribe specific actions for individual situations that I don't know about and couldn't adequately evaluate. If this content has added value to your understanding of how wealth works, demonstrate this by liking and sharing it with people you believe would benefit. Each share helps the algorithm show this type of evidence-based content to more people who are looking for alternatives to the speculative noise that dominates most of the online financial space. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. The content I publish regularly delves deeper into the principles discussed today, with additional data, historical case studies, and practical implementation frameworks. See you in the next video.